Just a quick show of hands. How many people in here are US citizens? Okay, great. So the vast majority are US citizens. So I'm going to talk from that perspective. And then I will quickly go over permanent residents and visa holders. As a US citizen, you have the maximum rights of any individual in this country, and you cannot be denied re-entry into the United States. Actually, the process for coming into the country should be very simple. We know it's not very simple, and unfortunately, since 9/11, it has been very difficult with Muslims being detained from anywhere between 1 to 4 or 5 hours. This past weekend, we saw people being detained between 6 to 12 hours, which I've been doing this work for a really long time, for the last 12 years. I've never seen people be detained for 12 hours when they're US citizens. Um, and so, as a US citizen, what we want you to know is you have the absolute right to re enter the country. Not only do you have that, but when you're at the border, the only questions you need to answer is first, you need to prove your US citizenship. So, as long as you have a valid passport, that's taken care of. Then, the second aspect of it really is the custom questions. So the customs questions are: where were you? How long did you travel? What was the reason for your travel? Are you bringing any fruit or products that you shouldn't be bringing back into the country? Um, Again, being from Iran, one of those products has always been pistachios for us. So it's like, do you have pistachios on you? And as long as you can say no to those questions. Oh, and the one of the other very common ones is, how much money are you bringing with you? Is it above the $10,000 amount where you have to declare? And if the answers to those are no, then you're free to enter. Are we good to go on the nerd rights? Okay, so for the purposes of Facebook, I'm gonna quickly restart. Have we started the video already? Okay, perfect. My name is Masi Fouladi. I'm the executive director of Cair, Washington. We're doing these Know Your Rights presentations in different communities across Washington State, but also making sure that we're posting them on Facebook for people so that it could be helpful to you. Unfortunately, this past weekend, we saw many Iranian Americans being detained at the border in Blaine. And so, what we wanted to make sure uh, going forward is that Iranian Americans, Middle Eastern Americans, and South Asian Americans know their rights at the borders on what questions they have to answer. So we're going to be answering and giving information of what you need to answer as a U.S. citizen, then quickly talking about what you need to know as a permanent resident, and then as a visa holder. And then after that, very briefly, we're going to talk about uh, your rights when law enforcement comes to visit you, particularly the FBI or Department of Homeland Security. And that really is because oftentimes after the questioning at the border, whether it's a couple weeks later or a couple years later, we've seen a trend of law enforcement following up with individuals. So going back to US citizenship, that's what we were talking about just now, is when you're coming across the border or at an airport, what you need to prove is that you're a US citizen. If you have your passport and it's in good standing, that is enough um, there for you. And then the additional questions are normal custom questions, the type of things like of where were you traveling, how long were you traveling for, um, are you bringing back any fruit or any other items that you need to declare? Are you do you have more than $10,000 with you? After these questions, in primary inspection, which is like the first person you meet at the border or at the airport, we've seen, unfortunately, a large trend of Muslims being placed into secondary questioning. In secondary questioning, what is really important for you all to understand is they cannot be asking you about your religious affiliation or nationality without any kind of suspicion or cause. So, if for the people, for example, this past weekend, we believe for all intents and purposes they were pulled aside into secondary questioning just because they were Iranian. And so they were starting and they were being asked questions like, um, what did you study in Iran? What school did you go to? Did you serve in the military? All of those questions are questions that you don't need to answer. As a US citizen, what we would recommend is letting them know I'm a US citizen. I've already answered the typical custom questions. I don't feel comfortable answering any of these questions because they're not relevant to my reentry into the United States, asking for their supervisor's name, asking them for their name, writing that down, asking them for their supervisor's name, writing that down. And then the worst thing they can do is they can really hold you there uh, for a bit longer, and but they have to eventually release you into the country. When they're already holding you for 6 to 12 hours and they're getting all those questions and information from you, we don't see any reason for you to be providing that. Um, One of the reasons for that is one question that we saw so many people being asked this weekend, and we typically see people being asked, is what are the names and first names, last names, emails of all your family members, of all of your Iranian American friends, of all your Muslim friends. Um, those are questions that are inappropriate, and what the government does, what CBP does, what um, the Department of Homeland Security does, they eventually turn that information over to the FBI. And then you get the FBI coming in and just going on fishing expeditions in our community, trying to question people and trying to get them to provide information. And they're really just doing that because of your identity. Whether it's Iranian or Muslim, they say that, oh, we have some reason to be more suspicious than you. And that's not constitutional. So that's why we tell individuals, answer the customs questions. If you prove that you're a US citizen, you don't have to answer anything else. Let them know, yes, it's unfortunate that they're probably going to hold you between 1 to 4 hours. But historically, we've seen that they hold you for that amount of period anyway. At least if you don't answer those questions and you exit, you have the peace of mind of knowing other people aren't going to be contacted. You're not going to be as likely to be followed up with. And another very important thing to know, um, fortunately, this didn't happen this weekend where um, cell phones and laptops were not being taken from individuals and searched. But historically at airports, that will happen. You'll be taken into interview room essentially, and you'll be asked to hand over your cell phone. A couple of quick things to know about your cell phone and handing it over. One is if your cell phone is protected with fingerprint identification or facial technology, they can ask you to put your finger on there and unlock your phone. If your phone is password protected, they don't, you, as a US citizen, you don't have to give them the password to open the phone. So one thing that we always recommend, even if you typically use fingerprint or facial recognition to unlock your phone, when you're traveling and going across the border or through an airport, go ahead and make your cell phone locked with a number. That way they can't get into it. Now, again, as a US citizen, you're not required to open the phone, but what the Department of Homeland Security does and what Custom and Border Patrol might do is they might ask you to turn over your phone. They essentially give you a piece of paper saying that they're going to confiscate the phone and they'll mail it back to you within 30 to 60 days. And if that's the case, what you want to make sure to do is get the information of the individual and the agency they're with that is confiscating the phone. And as soon as you get to another phone, once you've left the airport, contact us and we will follow up with them. Um, I know that can be extremely inconvenient to hand over your phone to someone. So what we recommend to do, especially with international travel, and if you have a history of being pulled over into secondary inspection and getting your phone confiscated, is to take a phone just for traveling purposes. That doesn't have all your pictures, that doesn't have all your social media, that doesn't have your contacts on it. Because at the end of the day, the fear is, look, if they if you open it for them, or if they take the phone and they extract information off of it, then you're giving them access to all your contacts, you're giving them access to all your social media, you're giving them access to all of this information that they otherwise don't have the right to have and in their possession. So those are some of the concerns that we have about individuals who are traveling. The other option for individuals who are traveling with their phone and are a little bit more tech savvy and have the time is you can essentially upload your information to a cloud that's secure, and then not have it on your that same phone that you're traveling with. We don't recommend deleting any information, but just uploading it to the cloud. Then once you get to your destination, you can download it again and then when you're traveling back, it's going through that process. I'm not tech savvy at all, so I typically just have either a travel phone that I go with, or I know that if I'm traveling and I haven't brought my travel phone with me, that's something that I'm risking if I go into secondary questioning. The last thing that I would mention for US citizens is of all of the groups of individuals, we are the ones with the most rights, and the more we assert our right, and the less information we will volunteer, the less likely this pattern of behavior is to continue. Meaning, Custom and Border Patrol, again, has been doing this for years now. And oftentimes in our community, especially as US citizens, we're like, well, we don't have anything to hide. So we're just going to hand over this information, which makes it, again, very easy for Custom and Border Patrol to say, look, we're going to continue to ask you because most of the people are already going to give it to us. So it really is our duty as US citizens to make sure that the illegal practices and the unconstitutional practices that they continue to display aren't reinforced by our cooperation. And what I was telling a lot of the individuals and media that we were reporting to today, I've heard stories about individuals who are not Muslim or aren't Iranian who go through secondary inspection. It's like a 30-minute to an hour process for them. And it's typically because, again, they found the pistachios or they found the oranges or the apple or banana in their bag. And so once that's taken care of and they paid the fine, they're on their way. But with us, it's different. It's really about our identity, and we don't want to reinforce that behavior. Now, when it comes to permanent residence, it's important to know that the rights of a U.S. permanent resident aren't as robust as a U.S. citizen. And the real key information to know in this process is really, as a green card holder, you want to make sure that you're not signing away your right to your green card at the border. We've seen this during the time of the Muslim ban, where Custom and Border would essentially give you a form and tell you to sign away the rights of your green card. As a permanent resident, you have the right to re-enter as long as you haven't violated your status as a permanent resident and to be seen and adjudicated in front of a judge. So we want to make sure that, again, if Customs wants to put you through that process, you do get a fair opportunity to go in front of a judge and you're not automatically signing away your right. Now, we've seen that green card holders can be held in excess of the normal 1 to 4 hours that we've seen with US citizens. But as long as you, again, provide the normal customs information and you do not sign any type of paperwork that gives away your right to your permanent residency, and as long as your permanent residency is in good standing, meaning like there's a lot of things that goes into that, including how long you're away from the country. If you're going to be away from the country for a prolonged period, you want to make sure that you've already spoken to an immigration attorney before you leave, so that when you're coming back into the country, you don't have any issues. So as long as all of those things are in order, then you have the right to re-enter. And then if you are followed up with, because you're going to be taken to an immigration judge for the adjudication of whether your green card is still in good standing, that's something that should happen after the fact. In any of these situations, whether you're a US citizen or green card holder, as soon as you've gone through that process in secondary, contact Cair Washington. If you're in some other part of the country, we have 34 offices throughout the nation. Contact your Cair office, and we will either be able to assist you or refer you to immigration attorneys that can help you. And then the last thing is visa holders. Now, this is where, unfortunately, we have the least rights. And if you do not cooperate with the Custom and Border Patrol, they have the right to refuse your entry. And the reasoning for that is a visa is essentially a pass to get you to the port of entry. And then at the port of entry, they can decide to let you in or not. So just because you have the visa doesn't necessarily mean that once you get to the country, whether that's at the border in Blaine or at an airport, that you're automatically guaranteed to come in. One of the things that we've seen oftentimes happen is people apply for a certain type of visa, and then they're questioned, and the Custom and Border Patrol make the determination that the reason that you indicated on the visa for coming to the country is different from the actual intent that you have. Meaning, for example, we had a case a while ago where someone had applied for a visitor visa and they confiscated their phone. And again, as a visa holder, at that point, you don't have the right to deny handing over your phone. They confiscated the phone and they saw text messages on there of the individual talking to someone about potentially getting employment once they came here. So they had applied for a visa for visiting purposes, but their intent to come here was for work purposes. And that invalidated their visa, and then they were sent back. So again, as a visa holder, it's incredibly important that when you are applying for whichever form of visa you are, for that to be accurate and to make sure that in answering these questions about why you're coming to the country, you stay consistent with that visa and know that whether it's your cell phone or your laptop, they will be searched. And if there is evidence to the contrary found on any of those, then that information will be used to essentially determine whether they should allow you to enter the country or not. I'm gonna finish with one last piece of one last explanation, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you all to see if you have any questions. This last piece is if you have some kind of pending immigration benefit. If you came here on a visa and you've applied for a green card, and you want to leave the country, make sure to contact an immigration attorney, or you can contact Cair, and we'll put you in touch with someone, or we'll help you ourselves, so that you've filed the proper documentation before you leave the country again. We recently had a case of an individual who, again, had a valid visa, applied for the green card in a valid way, but then left the country without applying for the documentation that said essentially, I'm going to be leaving and coming back, which the name of the application is like you're applying for advanced parole. But you need to make sure you take all of those proper steps, which is why it's very important that throughout all of the immigration process that you have an attorney. I know within the Iranian community and within many of our communities, we have a um, process of trusting individuals who aren't attorneys to help us with our applications. And those individuals will tell you and tell you accurately that they've done this for a long, long time. And they've helped so many people, they've helped their own family. And that may be the case, but we're in a different situation the last 3 years. Things are being analyzed with a lot more scrutiny from this administration. And you really want to make sure not only that an immigration attorney is looking at your applications and informing you of the process, but that it's actually an immigration attorney that has experience working with our communities. Because oftentimes, even immigration attorneys that don't work with our communities don't know the different hoops that we have to jump through. So that's what I wanted to end with. With that, I wanted to see if anyone has any questions. They can. Exactly. And the place that we see that most often is obviously AI, where there's laws that say you can't lie to a federal official. And if you provide misinformation, even if it's unintentional, that can be used against you. And what we've seen is if that information is provided to a CBP officer, and then that information is forwarded to the FBI essentially, and then they come and follow up with you, and then there's inconsistencies. The last thing you want to happen to you is either to be charged for lying to a federal official or to have that used as leverage against you in some other capacity. So that's another very valid point in why you don't want to offer up additional information because, again, the more you offer up, then not only is it more you have to remember to then tell Cair or tell your attorney later to make sure that you're being consistent, you're just giving them more materials to potentially try to find some kind of loophole to potentially prosecute you. And the thing to also mention is like most of the time when we're traveling back into the country, we're exhausted, right? You've been on a vacation for a really long time. You've traveled for business, whatever the case might be. You're not really in your best state of mind to answer these questions. And so because you have the right as a U.S. citizen or green card holder to re-enter, uh, we want you to practice that right. And then if anything comes from it afterwards, then once you're in the U.S., then you can have an attorney come and help you throughout that process. At the border, you don't have the luxury of having an attorney with you. But great question, comment, and if there's anything else, let me know. Yes, that's very vivid, of a very vivid image. But yeah, essentially anything at that point that you give them can be used against you. And what I would say is, um, the best thing to do in these types of times when you're being questioned is being very polite. Like when I go through this, when I've advised other individuals who are going through this, have the smile on your face. Thank you so much. I understand that you want to ask me these questions. Can I have your first name and last name? Can I have your supervisor's name? Notate that I don't feel comfortable asking these questions. Well, and then they're not going to let it go that easily. There's going to be a conversation of, well, we know you're good. We know you don't have anything to hide. And you're going to say, yeah, I understand that completely. But again, I'm a US citizen. I know my rights as a US citizen. I'm not going to answer these questions. So let me know whenever I can leave. But I've already answered the custom questions and I proved that I'm a citizen. And then oftentimes they'll bring you a piece of paper and be like, well, this is what we can do, or this is the things that we have the power to do. Read it. That doesn't change the fact of what your rights are under the Constitution and what you have as a citizen. So the only document that I've seen them hand to anyone that has any substance in it is when they tell you, okay, well, we're going to take your phone, and this is the instructions on how to get your phone back. Anything else that they put in front of you, you just continue to repeat. I understand. I'm a US citizen. All I need to do is answer the normal custom questions, which I have answered. And I've also let you know that I'm a US citizen. So please let me know when I'm free to go. And that's where you want to keep it. They can bring your bags in, they can search your bags. They can also do a chemical test on your hands where they do the little swipes. But aside from that, you just continue to maintain that same line with a smile on your face. Never yell at them, never escalate, and never use any kind of force. Don't push them back. Don't slap their hand if they touch you. If they do forcefully touch you or anything to that extent, you let us know afterwards and we'll deal with it after the fact. That's not a place for you to deal with it. And then one last thing that I'm going to mention because I forgot to mention before is for sisters who are going through um, at the airports when you're going through TSA. We often see that again, many people who are visibly Muslim are pulled aside, and especially sisters who are wearing hijab. One thing that I want you all to know is if you are going through TSA as you're going through security and you get pulled over to be patted down, first you can ask for a private room. So if you want a private room to be patted down in, you have the right to do that. Second, if they want to pat down your hijab, you actually have the right to say, I want to pat it down myself and go ahead and do that. We've also seen them want to use the x ray machine on people's um, heads If you're comfortable with that, that's fine. If you prefer them not to do that, tell them you want to exercise your right to again pat down the hijab yourself. And if they insist on removing the hijab, then obviously tell them that you want to be removed to the next room. We've seen that although you do have the right to pat down the hijab, some individuals at TSA will continue to insist that you have to take it off. At that point, ask for a room to be moved into so you can do that in private. And the other thing that's worth being mentioned in the context of just coming through TSA is the um, the machines. So like back in the day, you would just go through a normal X-ray machine. Nowadays, you go through the machine where you're putting your hands up. Um, a couple years ago, we found out that they were taking people's body images off of those scans. That isn't the case anymore. So that's something that has updated as of a few years ago. But if you have TSA pre-check, for example, and you've applied for that in advance, which is actually something that does help individuals with travel delays, you can go through the X-ray machine. And if you want to, again, opt out of going through that machine where you're raising your hands, you can ask to be taken through the X-ray machine, but then you're most likely going to be patted down afterwards. So those are just some options for you all to have. So with that, again, I want to turn it back to you all for questions.
So I think you mentioned something about like question they cannot so about the money thing. Can they insist on knowing the exact amount and are you supposed to tell them or you just say less than the limit of $10,000?
So if they can actually see how much ask you to like take out the money and
So you
count it. And so one of the things that if you don't know the exact amount, the best response is it's less than 10,000. Just make sure that that is truthful. You don't want to say like I have $981 and then it's like no, you actually have $1,981. So if you accurately know how much you have and you want to offer that information, that's fine. It's not the best practice. If you have less than 10,000, say I have less than 10,000, if they tell you how much you have, then you can go through and check how much it is and confirm to them. But that doesn't happen very often. I've seen it only in a couple of instances.
so the other thing I think you said something to the extent that like they can ask you who you met on this trip and stuff like that, but that's not is that a customary question that you have to answer or because then you can say less or more and
So
you know
you want to give a general idea of where you were and why, but you don't need to get into details. So it's like when during the summer I had the opportunity to go to Istanbul and Rome, and when I was coming back, I went through and you put the passport and they kind of print you something out at LAX where like it's your face and like there was a big old X on my face. So I was like, oh great, I'm gonna go through secondary questioning now. And so they asked me, what was your purpose of travel? I said I was on vacation. Where did you go? I went to Rome and Istanbul. Just very general, like these are the two major cities. Why did you go there? For tourism purposes. And then you really don't need to provide more information than that. You've given that general information. They might ask you again, like, do you have family in the area? Be like, and oftentimes we're going back to Iran or going to someplace to visit family. Yeah, I'm visiting family, but you don't need to go in the details of who I met with and whose house I stayed with and things like that.
that's not the normal thing.
No, that's just them getting very nitpicky. Just like I was traveling for purposes of tourism, for vacation, for business, and that's sufficient.
And so I think you said something about the phone thing. So so basically we are if the pin, you're not liable to tell them the pin or password, but if it's a biometric, they can ask you and you have to oblige.
Yes.
So basically, but if they confiscate it, like or try to search it, like do you should you kind of clarify that you do not agree to this search because like it's they if they if it's like I think like with law enforcement usually it's like if you agree to a search it's legal. Otherwise, if they don't have a probable cause, it's illegal. So is that same for immigration?
That's actually a really, really good question. Given that you're at a port of entry, your essentially Fourth Amendment rights are much lower than it would be at on the streets. So, like for example, if a police officer pulled you over on the street and they ask you, "Can I search your car?" and you say, "No, you don't have my consent to search my car," and then they go ahead and continue to search it without any kind of probable cause, then that search is invalid. You don't have that right at the airport. What they will give you a form to sign when they take your phone away, essentially saying that they're taking your phone away. But you don't like you articulating that it's not with your consent doesn't really have any legal ramifications.
So that's the same as airport or land border.
Yeah, any kind of border or port of entry.
So you don't have a right of air. So it's not covered by the illegal search procedure.
No,
They can do that, but you don't have to provide the password, but they can keep it.
they can keep it. And I don't remember properly if it's 30 or 60 days, but that there's a time period where they have to return it to you by. We've have had that happen before, and the community member will contact us. We'll contact DHS, and we get the electronic back for you. I saw a hand up in the back, and then I'll come. Go ahead. They can ask you. I think what we're trying to talk more about is like what your answers should be like. And you never want to lie. So that's one thing. You never want to lie. But when they're asking you about who did you visit with and who you didn't visit with, our advice is to keep it general. I went there for visiting family and traveling purposes. And if they start asking you, like, did you meet with this imam? Or did you meet with this sheikh? Or did you meet with this family member? You're like, look, I've articulated to you that I went there to visit my family. That's the reason I went there. I was on vacation. And I know my rights as a US citizen. I'm not going to answer anything more than that because, again, I have a US citizenship and I have the right to re enter the country. And that's it. Keep it, again, you don't want to offer up more information than you have to. So again, we've seen that happen a lot. They will either ask you, "Do you know this or that person?" or they'll even bring pictures and show you, like, do you recognize this individual? And essentially, they're trying to do the FBI's job for them at the border, knowing that you don't have an attorney. And then it's the same line. As a U.S. citizen, I have the right to re-enter. I provided all of the answers to the normal customs and border questions. I'd like to re-enter the country. And if they keep asking you that, be like, I'm a U.S. citizen. I can re-enter. If you want to follow up with me after I've entered the country, you can contact my attorney and you can ask him any questions that you would like. And at that point, again, the thing I'll mention in the FBI section is once law enforcement knows you have an attorney, their incentive to talk to you decreases so much because they know that someone who actually knows their rights is going to be with you. And when they ask things that they can't ask or shouldn't be asking or discriminatory, they're going to get called out on it. I saw a question here. So questions that have to do with your green card, so that they can see if it's valid, are questions that they can ask. So if they're asking you when did you apply for the green card, or on what basis, like did your spouse apply for you? Those are things that they're trying to determine the validity of the green card. So those questions are things that as a green card holder you have to answer. But in terms of if they're asking about other people and things like that, again, the best thing to do in that situation is like, look, I've answered the custom questions. I can answer any kind of questions you have about my green card to prove that I have a valid green card and can enter the country. But anything beyond that is outside of the scope of what you can ask me. So they can ask you where you're staying, essentially. So if you were staying at the address back home, you can say, I was staying at my house. If they ask you for the address, provide them with that address, but nothing outside of that.
So for the green card thing, do you still have a right to re-enter or not?
You have the right to re-enter as long as you have a valid green card. So as long as you haven't done anything criminal that invalidates your green card while you're abroad, um, and as long as you have that valid green card, you're allowed to re-enter. And really, what we've seen is the people who are impacted the most are just the ones who sign away their right to their green card at the border.
Most they make you like sign here.
Essentially, what happens is they'll detain you for such a long time. People get frustrated, they get irritated. It's you've been there for like 8 hours, and they're like, "We can make all this go away. Here, just sign this form." But that form essentially says, "That's a really good question. It's in our Know Your Rights material, so I'll look it up for y'all really quickly." Um,
So there's a particular form where you sign
yes,
away your green card, as in you don't want to be a green card holder anymore.
yes, and give me 1 second as I pull that up. And if anyone finds it before me, let me know. I cannot find it right now, but what I will do is um, on the Facebook post, comment there, and we'll also share it with either the mom or one of the board members so that they can make sure to tell you all. But again, the thing that we want to re-emphasize with the green card is as long as your travel outside the country was uh, brief and innocent, which is the language that we use, then you're allowed to come back into the country. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Uh, you might have answered this already, but as a U.S. citizen, how long is there a time limit that they can hold you at the border? Can they keep you for hours, days? What how long can they hold you? And can they deny you entry?
So they can't deny you entry. Um, and what happened this past weekend was 6 to 12 hours of detention is something I've been doing this work for a long time that I hadn't seen. Typically, what we've seen is people being held between 1 to 4 hours, with the very, very upper limit of that being around 5.5, 6 hours. Um, and one thing to mention in those like longer detentions, in every case that I've seen of that is the individual was offering them information. So you're continuing to talk to them and they continue to ask you questions. Where if you're asserting your right that, look, I'm a US citizen, I'm allowed to re enter, I've answered all the custom questions and I've proven that I'm a US citizen, and you're not offering them any more information, at a certain point they're going to realize they're not getting anything from you and they have to let you back into the country. So the hope is that they would let you back in sooner rather than later. But if they're giving you pictures of people and you're looking at those, and you're answering it and you seem to be cooperating, then it further incentivizes them to keep you there and get as much information from you as possible. Go ahead. Sure. Oh, of course. So, the question was if they ask you for your driver license information or your social security, should you provide that information? I've actually never experienced them asking a question like that, but again, as long as you've proven your US citizenship and you've proven the fact and you've answered the customs questions, I don't see why you would have to um, provide that information. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and so what I would say is the brother was talking about an incident where he was being taken to the plane. Probably on the runway, they pulled you aside and they asked you those questions, or like as you were going through. Okay, pulled you aside, and so they asked him essentially how much money he had, and when they pulled him aside and they were counting the money or verifying that they're asking him other questions. At that point, what I would do is, again, I don't understand why you need this information. I have my valid travel documents. I'm a U.S. citizen, so I don't feel comfortable giving you that kind of information. Um, Go ahead. So if you have your U.S. passport, that oh, you don't have one. Okay. So at that point, you you essentially have to prove your U.S. citizenship. So in any way that you can do that, whether that's with copies and having the enhanced driver license, that's the best, um, the second best thing you can do. The best and easiest way to get through, obviously, is with having that valid passport, because that really limits the amount of additional information that you need to provide. Uh, for children, so technically, um, children who are traveling, oftentimes, as long as they're with an adult, you don't need that documentation. Again, out of abundance of caution, having that documentation with you is just saves you headache and saves you less time in having to communicate with them. So we recommend you take that documentation. Again, if there are certain reasons that you don't aren't able to for a particular trip, the best thing to do is contact us, and we will even take a further step, do a little bit of research on it to make sure whatever advice that we're giving you is best for that moment in time. Right, with everything that was happening this weekend, for example, the advice could have potentially been different than what it would have been 6 months ago. Yeah. No worries. So the questions that you have to answer as a U.S. citizen are proving that you are a citizen. Enhanced driver license, with the passport, you're proving that you are a U.S. citizen. That's sufficient. Then the additional questions that you can ask is the normal custom questions. How long were you traveling for? What was the purpose of your travel? Where did you stay? And things like, do you have money in excess of the limit? Are you bringing any fruits back with you? Those are the only questions as a U.S. citizen you have to answer, especially given circumstances like this weekend where people were just being pulled aside because of their nationality. So anything in addition to that, asserting your right as a U.S. citizen, saying I've already answered the normal customs questions, and I have done prove my citizenship. I would like to again be allowed to enter. Is what we recommend. Doing it with a smile and making sure that you're staying professional throughout that process. So the there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is oftentimes if you're a naturalized citizen, like I was born in Isfahan, on my passport it says my nation of birth is Iran, right? So they'll know that already going into it, right? And so if they ask me if I'm from Iran, it's already in there, and it's like yes, I'm from Iran. And the other thing is I'm proud to be from Iran. So like if someone's gonna ask me that, it's like yes, I am. And if they ask you something to that extent, I would say offering that information is not problematic in that they shouldn't be discriminating against you because of that. But it's important to note that they asked you. So afterwards, when you're talking with us, we have something to the effect of, look, they actually asked her about her nationality, or they asked him about his nationality, and he or she had nothing else, or no other reasons to be pulled over except for that. And so that's the simplest response to that question, right? I'm gonna see if there's any other questions on the sister side that I can answer. Okay, perfect. You had a follow up?
So I think one thing is I think even if it's expired passport, in my experience over the land border, I think they prefer because they can swap it and versus a child's birth certificate. So and I think it would be better to have a expired one with another document. So I think carrying the expired one is not. I guess it's not valid in that sense, but
But even with the validity of, I believe whether it's 6 months to a year of the passport expiring, oftentimes you can still use it. So yeah, again, if you do have that passport with you, it's always recommended to have it.
the other thing is I think if, can they actually take
Oh, I 407. So again, we had talked about this earlier about if you're a green card holder, making sure you don't sign away your green card. And the form, think one of the brothers looked it up, is the I-407. You want to make sure not to sign that because that is essentially you giving up your right to your green card.
is there any form you should sign? Like is there a legitimate form that should be signed? I'm thinking you should not be signing anything.
You shouldn't be signing anything. The only thing is if they're taking your phone away, they
Like
will
that.
give you that form to say that like we're taking away, hold on to this receipt. That's the only thing that you should be signing.
That's information.
Y- It's informational and it tells you, it's essentially acts as a receipt.
Oh, and so I think my question was like you talk about phone that they can take your phone and like what about like wallet and contents of the wallet? Can they
They
like
can
other than
search that.
money they can
They can search all your bags. They can search your both your carry-on and as well as the bags that you submit underneath.
so they so you can they can actually make copies of documents in your wallet also?
Yeah, oftentimes when they're searching the materials, they'll either search it in front of you or they'll search it in private. And many of you probably have also seen little notices in your bags when you check them in, whereas like DHS has opened your bag for random searches. Yeah. Go ahead. So if your phone is password protected and you're a US citizen, you don't have to open the phone for them, but they can confiscate your phone. And then they, in that process, if you choose not to give them your password and they take your phone, they will have you sign something essentially saying that your phone will be returned in 30 to 60 days. Here's the receipt, and this is the process to get your phone back. So this happens the vast majority of the time when you're traveling across the border internationally. We have seen instances of when people are traveling domestically and this happening to them as well. Um, for that, you're not typically going through. You can be approached at different points. You might be approached as you're exiting the plane. You might even be, the plane might land and there will be an announcement made that we're going to be, no one get up, we're going to be coming and getting this individual off the plane. And then they'll go and they'll take you to a room and ask you questions.
So just follow up on that. So I know that we said that port of entry, the right to surgeoncy visa is different, but now that you're in a domestic airport, have taken a domestic flight, this time do you have those Fourth Amendment rights?
No, the same rights that you're essentially still at a port of entry. So
Even though domestic travel
even if it's a domestic travel, you're still at the airport. You're still next to a border and or essentially what they consider a border. So the same rights apply. Go ahead. So the first question, we do not want to discourage anyone from traveling to Vancouver or going through Peace Arch. We want to make sure you know your rights before you go, so that when you're going and when you're coming back, you're answering the questions appropriately. But we're not in any way discouraging people from traveling. The second about your green card question about applying for citizenship, I think it's excellent to apply for citizenship. But what you want to do is you make sure you use an attorney that is used to doing applications for Muslims and people of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent, because they know the things to look at. They also know when you're doing that green card application, they'll make sure to go through that to make sure it's consistent. So would definitely encourage you to apply for citizenship. There's great organizations like One America that actually will help you and assist you with that. And if you want to contact CARE, we can either put you in touch with someone or let you know when the next clinic is coming up so that you can do that. Right? Any other questions on travel? Because the FBI stuff is actually even simpler. So I want to move on to that if there aren't any other questions. So when you're being approached by the FBI, and I'm only gonna cover issues of being approached by FBI and DHS, not about being pulled over by cops and officers on the street, because that's really what impacts our community the most. We've seen for years now that the FBI will come and ask people questions, whether it's at their home or at their place of business. And in all of these situations, you have the absolute right to have an attorney present, and you do not have to give them the answers at the point when they're coming and asking you those questions. So what you really want to do is ask them for their business card and let them know. Again, I will be following up with you with my attorney. So you contact CARE. We will get in contact with the FBI agent. Try to inquire as to why they're asking you questions. Then talk to you and give you your options. You do not have to even meet with them. And so we want you to make sure that you know that, right? I'm going to give a couple of tips for when they come and visit you at your house. If you see a FBI agent or Department of Homeland Security officer agent coming to your home, it's important not to let them in. I know as a people, we are very, very hospitable. We want to give chai to everyone, but they really don't deserve our chai. So what I would recommend is if someone comes and knocks on your door, actually closing the door behind you, exiting, and like on in front of your door, um, answering and giving them the information to the extent that I'm not going to be talking to you. Give me your business card. I will have someone contact you. But you don't even want to give them or their line of sight anything inside your house that they can view that they can then potentially use as, oh, okay, we had reasonable suspicion to enter the home because we saw X or we saw Y. We've seen things as mundane as, oh, people enter and they see this book by a particular scholar, or they see a Quran and they see Arabic in it. So for them, well, there's some reason now that I have to go in. Those aren't valid reasons. You have a First Amendment right to practice your religion. You also have your First Amendment right to read and have political opinions of whatever issues that are important to you. So we emphasize again, if you are approached at your home by FBI agent, uh, once you identify them as an agent, go ahead and close the door behind you. One thing that I like to tell individuals is if there's someone else home with you saying something to the effect of, give me 1 second, closing the door, locking it, letting that other family member or friend know, look, I'm going to go step outside for a few minutes, let them know that I'm not going to be talking to them and that I'll have an attorney contact them and come back, going out there, answering those questions, and then essentially keeping it very simple. I don't feel comfortable talking to you without an attorney present. If you go ahead and give me your card, I'll have an attorney contact you. And then you can contact CARE. We provide that service for absolutely for free. We will not charge you anything for that. We will follow up with the agent. We will try to understand why they want to question you. We'll again let you know what we think, and then at that point you can decide whether you want to um, answer the questions or not. It's important to note, the brother had mentioned this very early on. You do not want to, under any circumstances, lie to a federal official. There are You can spend time in prison essentially for doing that. So you want to make sure whenever you're speaking to them, you're keeping your answers short. You're letting them know you want an attorney present. And if even if it's a benign question in your mind of, oh, we heard that you just got back from X and we just wanted to make sure that you got back on Friday. And you say, yeah, I got back on Friday, but like really you got back on Saturday. You don't want to give them anything to potentially use as leverage against you to say that you were lying. to them. We have seen terrible behavior from the FBI over the years with them trying to use individuals and mosques as informant. They've tried to use pending immigration applications for your family members as reasons to encourage people to become informants. So their practices are not halal by any means. They really break all of the rules, and they will even lie to you to entice you to respond in a way. So their code of ethics and morals is nothing that we as Muslims abide by, and we want to make sure that when you are interacting with them, you have an attorney that is there and available to give you the right advice. So with that, I want to see if there's any questions about interacting with FBI. Sure. So it's something that we've. I'll repeat the question. The question was the brother was asking for a little bit more information about the FBI being able to lie to you, and that he had said that there was cases where that had happened, where the FBI has essentially entrapped you, meaning they had provided false information so that they can then say, "Oh, I got you." And a lot of these terrorist cases that were thwarted are often cases of entrapment. The FBI, again, speaking of their low moral standard, is they will go after the individuals with who are just becoming adults. They will go after individuals who might have some kind of special needs and try to take advantage of those. So we've seen them lie on multiple occasions to entice the community member to say, yeah, I don't agree with what's happening here. I don't agree with what's happening there. And yeah, let's do something about it. And then try to use that as saying, like, oh, look, this person had intent to do X or Y. Or try to get you to walk into a lie and then say that you're lying to a federal official. So it's really important minimizing any kind of communication with them, again, in a respectful way, is key to making sure that you're really practicing your rights to the maximum extent. Go ahead. They cannot talk to minors, but we have seen them approach minors, and again, it doesn't happen often. If it does happen, please contact us and let us know. Any, and I have to say, mashallah, I'm extremely impressed by the turnout, both on the brothers and sisters side. Typically, especially on the sisters side, we see a ton more people than the brothers, but the brothers are doing a great job of representing tonight, alhamdulillah. Go ahead.
One more question on this. For lying, is it a crime? Is it a crime to lie to be a federal official, or is it a crime only under law?
No, it's a crime to lie to a federal official, um, and it's prosecutable, and we've seen people being prosecuted, and getting anywhere between 5 to 7 years, in prison for that. And oftentimes, what happens is if you do, um, walk yourself into a lie with a federal official, they will try to use that as leverage, against you to become an informant in the community or provide information about X or Y or Z. That's why, again, it's really crucial to minimize the amount of information you're giving to them. Because honestly, even with those lies, oftentimes it's just misspeaking, not recalling dates properly, and that's the like absolute worst thing that can happen to you. Just because you're trying to be helpful and you really have nothing to hide, to put yourself in that situation is not beneficial to you. All right, I don't know what time it is. 8:34. So I know we did say that we're gonna wrap the program at 8:30. If you have any other questions, I'll be around for a little while. Free to approach me. We have some more Know Your Rights materials, both in English and Farsi. So we'll go ahead and pass it to the sister side so that if people are interested, they can go ahead and take that. Our website is cair, CAIRWA.org. So cairwa.org. and we're also very active on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you ever have any concerns or issues, feel free to call us at 206 367 4081. The phone number again is 206 367 4081. We provide our legal services free of service, and we're really here as a resource to the community. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be around, and feel free to reach out. Assalamu alaikum. Of course.